I was 8 years old the night my parents decided I was too much for them. Not too loud, not too wild, just too broken in ways they didn't want to fix. My legs never worked the way other kids did, so I became the silent calculation in their cost of living. They packed my life into a cheap blue suitcase, drove me past the neon-lit hospital where I'd learned to walk with braces, and handed me over to strangers like I was just another bill to pay off. I used to think no pain could cut deeper than hearing your father call you an expense. But years later, when I inherited everything from the man who truly raised me, my biological father, who once signed me away, showed up on my doorstep demanding a piece of the life he'd abandoned. Funny thing about family, sometimes the people who break you come back hoping you'll help put them back together. My name is Atlas, and this is the story of how I learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who stays and who walks away when you need them most. But before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. If my journey speaks to you, please subscribe and join me. Sometimes surviving is the bravest thing we ever do. When I look back, everything about my childhood feels damp rain slicking the grass drops ticking across our roof, the air thick and cold in the mornings. Our house stood 2 stories above a patchy lawn in a Seattle suburb, cedar planks weathered to a gray I always thought looked sad. I remember the sound of the floorboards groaning beneath my walker, how the stairs seemed to taunt me every day, daring me to try again, with legs that would never quite keep up. Ethan and Jordan, my brothers, were rockets thundering down the hallway, racing their bikes on the sidewalk, chasing after footballs and praise. I was different. Born with mild cerebral palsy, I spent my days trying to prove my mind could carry me where my legs could not. There was always something on TV, usually a Seahawks game or old sitcom reruns, but what I remember most is my mother kneeling beside me, gently guiding my hands through origami folds. We practiced for hours, turning library pages and scraps of paper into battered cranes and lopsided frogs, her voice soft as she encouraged me to keep going no matter how badly my hands trembled. She tried to make the world less cruel for me in small ways: warm soup when the weather turned, extra time with my physical therapy workbook, letting me slice strawberries even if it took me 3 times as long. My father, Victor, lived in another realm entirely. His footsteps always sounded like closing doors. He ran a bank branch downtown, dressed sharp, rarely smiled at home unless one of my brothers won a game. When Ethan brought home a trophy, Dad lifted him up, spun him around, promised a trip to Dick's Sporting Goods for any gear he wanted. When I aced a math test, Dad nodded once, barely glancing up from his paperwork. "That's good, Atlas, but can you try walking up the stairs by yourself next time?" He kept a ledger in his mind, measuring us by achievement and efficiency, and my entries never seemed to balance out. Sometimes at night, after everyone else was asleep, I'd sit at the top of the staircase, running numbers through my head: how many steps, how many seconds per step, how many times I'd have to fall and get up to be worth it. But my mother tried to fill the gaps. She brought home library books, especially ones about space and architecture subjects that didn't ask anything of my body. I built a model of the Space Needle out of cereal boxes, hands shaking as I cut cardboard, dreaming about structures that could stand strong no matter how battered they got. She found an origami book at the Seattle Public Library and told me that if my fingers learned patience, my heart might too. I believed her mostly because she was the only one who looked at me and didn't flinch. The seasons in Seattle had a rhythm. Christmases meant rain pooling under the porch, the tree twinkling in our living room while I opened science kits, and my brothers tore through boxes of baseball gloves and remote-controlled cars. Summers brought picnics at Lake Washington, everyone else splashing in the shallows while I read under a tree, pretending the sound of their laughter didn't sting. Sunday afternoons were for football games, Dad and my brothers yelling at the TV, the house filled with noise I never felt part of. Still, I pushed myself. I tried every day to walk the stairs, even when the pain made me sweat and the world spun at the top. I kept a notebook of my physical therapy exercises, some pages filled with proud check marks, others left blank when I failed. Every small triumph, folding a perfect crane, reading a chapter without stopping, hauling myself up one extra stair, felt like a secret no one else noticed. My brothers loved me in their own clumsy way, sometimes helping me when no one was looking, sometimes making jokes about how slow I moved. "Come on, Atlas, race you to the mailbox," Jordan would call, knowing I'd always lose. I tried to laugh to show I could take it, but every laugh cost me something. My 6th birthday was quiet, just a tiny cake, a couple of presents, the TV murmuring in the background. Mom kissed my forehead. Ethan ruffled my hair, and Dad handed me a $20 bill, eyes already back on his phone. Later that night, I heard him in the kitchen, his voice low and tired as he spoke to my uncle on the phone. "No point in a big party for the crippled one. Laura already spends enough on doctors. He's a cost, not an investment." I remember sitting there in the dark, the air full of rain and secrets, wondering if I could ever do enough to balance his books. That night, I promised myself that my value would never be measured by my legs or by his standards. I would find a way to matter, even if I had to build it out of cardboard and hope. The first time I made it to the top of the stairs on my own, I sat down at the landing out of breath and shaking, but I smiled. I knew then that my victories would always be quiet, always lonely, but always real. As I watched the rain streak down the window, I couldn't help but wonder if my family ever had to choose what place would there be for a child like me. Somewhere between 7 and 8, my house stopped feeling like a home and became a waiting room. Cold, efficient, a place where decisions got made by people pretending I wasn't there. The birth of my youngest brother Dylan was coming up, and the air in our living room was thick with planning. My parents hunched over stacks of insurance forms, medical bills, and school tuition statements, arguing in whispers about who would get what, who needed what, and who exactly was worth what. The carpet was soft but stained. The coffee table was littered with receipts and insurance pamphlets. Outside, Seattle's rain pressed against the windows so hard it felt like the sky itself was trying to drown us. I watched Mom and Dad fuss over a nursery for Dylan, fresh paint, a brand new crib, a shiny bike hung on the wall. I wheeled my walker around the house quietly, doing my best not to be a problem, not to slow anyone down. I'd figured out that if I made my own breakfast, cleaned up after myself, and learned to get up from the floor without help, everyone seemed just a little less annoyed. I saw how excited Dad got for every ultrasound, how he handed out cigars to family friends when Dylan was born. How his smile stretched wider for this new hope than it ever had for me. Our living room transformed into a conference room almost overnight. Dad ran strategy meetings at the coffee table, listing expenses out loud. Ethan's tuition, Jordan's travel team, Dylan's pediatrician, Atlas's therapy bills. The last item always landed heavy, as if the whole house heard it. I started to listen for my name in the context of costs, not conversations. I would hear my parents debate if I really needed another set of braces, if I could get by with Jordan's hand-me-down clothes, if it made sense to keep paying for swimming lessons I hated anyway. Even small moments were weighted. When I offered to help with Dylan, fetching diapers, mixing formula, cleaning up the kitchen, even after I'd slipped and bruised my knee, no one really noticed. Sometimes I caught Dad's eye, saw him calculating what I was worth. Mom's silences got longer, her apologies more practiced, as if she was quietly preparing to leave a part of herself behind. After Dylan was born, Dad passed out cigars at the hospital, beaming in every photo with a pride that felt foreign to me. There were hundreds of pictures of Dylan's first days, but I was in almost none of them. The new family portrait went up in the hallway, a perfect smiling tableau that didn't include me. I learned to disappear. I became the extra shadow in the background, the silent observer, doing my best to make myself small. If I ate less, asked for less, needed less, maybe it would be easier for everyone. The guilt settled in deep, not just for my disability, but for existing at all. Dad started to talk in vague terms about better options for the future, dropping hints about programs and facilities that could really help kids like Atlas. I heard him on the phone with insurance agents, his tone flat and businesslike, as if he was haggling over the price of a car, not a child. Mom never argued, she just nodded, eyes down, folding laundry tighter than ever. One day, looking for my origami book, I found a stack of Dad's files half hidden under a pile of old newspapers. Nestled inside was a printed email with a headline that punched me in the gut: consultation regarding termination of parental rights and transition to specialized care. My hands shook as I read the words, realizing that the opportunity Dad kept mentioning was actually a plan to give me up. They hadn't told me. No one had told me. That evening, I lined up my collection of origami cranes along the windowsill and stared out at the endless gray sky, listening to the rain drumming against the glass. I told myself if they were drawing a line to put me on the outside, maybe I'd just have to draw my own line somewhere they couldn't reach. And for the first time, I understood sometimes the hardest thing isn't being left out. It's realizing they'd planned for it all along. The morning I left for good was colder than any I remembered. The kitchen smelled faintly of pancake batter and burnt butter, but the air was thick with silence. Mom moved around me quietly, setting the table for one less person, her eyes swollen from a night of crying she hadn't meant for anyone to notice. I tried to help, carefully packing my few things, library books about the planets and famous buildings, a photo from last Christmas, the old origami cranes I'd managed to keep hidden from my brother's, one sweatshirt that still smelled like our house in winter. My hands shook as I zipped up the suitcase, the same cheap blue one from the thrift store. Dad came into the kitchen already dressed for work, tie perfectly straight. He read aloud the advantages of the new arrangement, explaining how this would give me a real chance at better care. Mom signed the last stack of paperwork without looking up. I told them I could wear Jordan's old clothes, I could eat less, I could take care of myself. They didn't answer. When it was time to leave, I looked around the kitchen one last time, the faded linoleum, the chipped mug I always used, the row of cereal boxes on top of the fridge. Every ordinary thing seemed to belong to someone else now. The car ride was silent except for the faint hum of the heater. We drove past Lake Washington, the trees dripping with rain, and I caught a glimpse of the Space Needle in the distance. I tried to memorize everything, the curve of the road, the way the clouds hung low, the feeling of my life shrinking with every mile. The agency building was bright and sterile, the walls lined with posters promising a new start and every child deserves a chance. The scent of disinfectant followed me through every hallway. A woman named Miss Lopez met us at the door, clipboard in hand, her eyes kind but practiced. She asked me questions, checked boxes, recorded my medical needs. Dad handed over the folder of documents, careful to explain how the system is much better equipped than a family ever could be. I watched Mom sign the final page. Her hands shook. She tried to smile at me, but it was the same smile she used at funerals. Dad put a hand on my shoulder, squeezed just hard enough to let me know he was done. Then they turned and walked away, their footsteps echoing down the hall. I listened to the sound until I couldn't anymore. No one looked back. A staff member handed me my new file, and through the clear plastic I saw a sheet titled Hayes Family Financial Plan. There, between canceled gym membership and postponed TV upgrade, was my name. I was an item on a list aligned in a spreadsheet that had been balanced months before. This wasn't a sudden decision. I was a calculation, a subtraction, not a loss. Sitting on the hard bench in the waiting area, I pulled the last origami crane from my pocket, running my fingers along the creased wings. Miss Lopez knelt down so our eyes were level. She told me I was more than a file or a diagnosis or a cost. Atlas, you are not what's written on this page. None of us are. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. They gave me a printed receipt with both my parents' signatures, the ink still wet. I pressed my thumb into the blue stamp as if that might keep me anchored to something. In that moment, I felt nothing, no anger, no sorrow, just the cold weight of being left out of my own story. But I made a promise. Holding that paper crane tight, no matter what happened next, no matter where I ended up, I would never let a diagnosis or a document decide my worth again. I would write my own story, even if I had to start from scratch. The next years blurred together in a gray mosaic of strange beds, new faces, and endless goodbyes. The group home in Seattle was my first stop, a squat brick building with narrow hallways and a perpetual haze of bleach. The rooms were lined with metal cots and peeling posters, the air always humming with restless children and faraway voices. Nights were the hardest, with kids crying in the dark or whispering into pillows. I kept mostly to myself, clutching my suitcase, organizing my books on a shelf above the bed, small islands of order in a world that never stayed the same for long. Every few months, a new family would take me in. There was the couple with too many kids who forgot I was there as soon as the check arrived. Another family who made me sleep upstairs, struggling on the steps because their apartment didn't have a ramp. I tried to keep out of the way, eating quickly and quietly, cleaning up after myself, becoming invisible so I wouldn't be sent back too soon. Some families just wanted the stipend, others wanted a child who could help around the house, but none wanted a boy who couldn't play soccer or rake leaves or win ribbons at field day. At school, I was the new kid again and again, always the one who needed special accommodations, always the one who ate lunch in the library rather than risk the cafeteria. I learned to read lips, to study faces, to spot the smallest changes in mood. Books became my escape towers of them, sometimes stacked so high they threatened to topple, each one a different world I could disappear into. The loneliness settled deep. I stopped introducing myself to classmates. I quit answering questions unless called on directly. When a foster parent snapped at me for breaking a dish I hadn't even touched, I just apologized and went back to my room. In winter, when the nights seemed longer than the days, I would lie awake and dream of being left behind again, sometimes so vivid I'd wake up clutching my pillow with tears on my face. Miss Lopez kept showing up, rain or shine, checking on me, making sure I had books to read. She told me my worth wasn't determined by how fast I could run or what I could do for a family. "You're not your legs, Atlas," she'd say. "Don't ever let anyone make you think otherwise." I tried to believe her, but the proof was thin on the ground. One afternoon, I overheard a couple tell Miss Lopez right in front of me that they were looking for a boy who could at least run around and kick a ball. I felt something shut down inside me. From then on, I stopped even trying to make friends. That winter, after another failed placement, the agency sent me to a psychologist, Dr. Sophia Reyes. She asked about my nightmares, listened when I described the ache of never belonging anywhere. She told me that my disability was not my fault and that the real failure belonged to those who couldn't see beyond it. Her words didn't fix everything, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a small seed of hope. Maybe there was nothing wrong with me that needed fixing. Then everything changed. Miss Lopez introduced me to an older man named Harlan Vale, a widower with no children of his own, living in a rambling craftsman house on the edge of town. He met me at the door, lowering himself to one knee despite his bad leg, and said, "I'm Harlan. Welcome, Atlas." Instead of listing rules, he asked what color I wanted for my new room. He started building a ramp on the porch before I'd even moved in, showing me the blueprints and asking for my opinion. For the first time, someone acted like I belonged. The first night in Harlan's house, I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with all the ways this could go wrong. But as I lay awake, I heard quiet footsteps outside my door. Harlan was sitting there reading a book, a mug of hot chocolate in his hands. "If you need anything, just knock," he whispered. I didn't say a word. I just watched him, waiting to see if he would leave like everyone else. He didn't. When morning came, he was still there, fast asleep against the wall. Later, as we organized my books on a shelf he'd built, I finally found the courage to ask if I stay here. "Would I be your son?" Harlan smiled, his eyes tired but kind. "Only if you want to be Atlas. Family is something we choose." That night, for the first time in years, I slept through until morning, my heart a little lighter, a little less guarded. For the first time, I began to wonder if home wasn't a place or a person, but a feeling I could grow into, one slow breath at a time. When I moved in with Harlan, I was still more shadow than boy, my voice a thin echo in rooms that were too quiet, too new. His house was nothing like the others, a craftsman tucked under old maples at the edge of the city garden beds overflowing with mint and tomatoes, a wide porch with a ramp he'd built himself. The air always smelled of books and coffee and something green from the earth. My bedroom was a blank canvas. Harlan let me pick out the paint and help tape the corners, splattering blue across the floor as I laughed for the first time in months. He never tiptoed around my differences. Instead, he handed me blueprints, kits for building bridges, puzzles of famous skylines. We'd spend afternoons at the dining table, our hands sticky with glue, building models of the Space Needle or the Golden Gate. "You have an architect's mind," he'd say, studying my work. "You see possibility where others see limits." On Saturdays, we visited the library or caught the bus downtown just to look at buildings, tracing lines with our eyes, counting the stories, guessing the weight of the steel beneath the glass. Therapy was a part of the routine, but so was laughter. Harlan never missed a session, never made me feel like my appointments were burdens. He taught me that families are chosen, not given. Some people inherit love, he'd say, as we weeded the garden, and some of us have to plant it one stubborn seed at a time. I wanted so badly to believe that I could belong, not by default, but by design. School was different now. I got bused to a district with a real accessibility program. The classrooms were on the first floor, desks moved to fit my chair, and teachers didn't blink when I needed extra time. Still, the stares didn't go away overnight. Some kids kept their distance, uncomfortable with difference. Others hovered at the edges, polite but uncertain. I kept to myself at first, clutching my notebook, sketching bridges in the margins, always afraid that if I spoke up, I'd give them a new reason to look away. But in 7th grade, everything shifted when I met Mia Gonzalez. She was quick to laugh, quick to defend anyone left out, and she didn't treat me like a project or a charity case. We became partners for a science fair, built a model suspension bridge from string and popsicle sticks, and won first place. That night, she invited me over for dinner, where her house was a hurricane of noise and cousins and shared food. Her parents joked, teased, listened. After dinner, as we worked on homework at the kitchen table, I overheard her mom telling her dad, "Harlan's not even blood, but you can see how he looks at Atlas. He loves him like his own." Sometimes I wish every kid could have someone like that. For the first time, I felt seen, not just for my struggles, but for the care I inspired in someone else. On the night before my 11th birthday, Harlan gave me a letter. The envelope was heavy, the handwriting a little shaky but deliberate. Inside, he'd written, "Family isn't where you come from. It's where you belong." Tucked in with the letter were adoption papers. I could hardly breathe as I read them, hands shaking. Harlan sat beside me, his arm warm and steady across my shoulders, and asked if I'd let him be my real dad. The sense of relief and joy was so sharp it was almost painful. When the judge signed the documents, my name became Atlas Reed. Things began to change. I grew more confident, volunteering answers in class, joining the school's design club, and once even giving a talk about my dream to become an architect. Teachers encouraged me. Classmates started seeking me out for group projects. I learned how to advocate for myself, to ask for what I needed without apology. With each passing year, I saw more possibility in the world, more opportunity to create something that would last beyond my own life. There were hard moments, of course. Sometimes a teacher would talk down to me or a student would mock my limp, but I learned to let it slide. I focused on what I could build, not what I lacked. I started designing accessible spaces, sketching community centers with ramps and wide doors, reading everything I could about universal design. Harlan gave me a set of professional drafting tools for my 16th birthday, and together we built a bookshelf for my growing collection of models and books. The years passed in a rhythm of school therapy, garden chores, and endless building. Every evening, Harlan and I would sit on the porch and watch the Seattle rain, talking about everything and nothing. One night, with thunder rumbling in the distance, he said, "We built this family, you and I, out of scraps and second chances. That's what makes it real." For the first time, I let myself believe it. I belonged truly and completely. After Harlan died, Seattle felt emptier than ever. The rain didn't let up for weeks, and the house creaked at night as if missing his steady presence. I'd built a life, career, friends, a house filled with light and laughter, but nothing prepared me for the return of the past. My father's name was Victor, and the last time I'd seen him, he hadn't looked back. Now he was everywhere, in my inbox, on my phone, even outside my gate, an older, worn-down version of the man who once crossed me off a spreadsheet. It started with a news article about my inheritance. After Harlan passed, the will was settled, and my story how a foster child had become the son and heir of a respected businessman made the local paper. That same week, I received the first email from Victor, vague at first, then more urgent. He wanted to meet. He said he missed me, that Mom had died a decade before, and he'd made mistakes. I ignored him, hoping he'd disappear again, but he didn't. Soon, Victor was at my door, haggard and desperate, talking about family and forgiveness. The old anger and uncertainty came back in waves. He spun stories about how he'd tried to find me, how hard it had been after the divorce, but his eyes kept sliding over the pictures on my wall, photos of me and Harlan at graduations, barbecues, laughing on the beach. He wanted money. He wanted a new start. But it wasn't about reconciliation, it was about survival. Through friends, I learned Victor had lost everything: his job at the bank, his savings, even his house. He was drowning in debt, addicted to gambling, desperate enough to threaten lawsuits if I didn't share what I'd inherited. When I didn't give in, he started calling my friends, showing up at Mia's workplace, spreading rumors that I was ungrateful, even threatening to take my story to the media. The weight of his intrusion pressed in on me, making me question every choice I'd made. Late one night, my brother Jordan reached out. We hadn't spoken since childhood, but now he wanted to talk. Over coffee in a quiet cafe, he told me what I'd never known: how our mother had tried in secret to find me after I left. But Victor had blocked every attempt. Jordan was ashamed of the way he'd treated me, apologizing for the years of silence and distance. The pain and relief mingled a knot I couldn't quite untangle. Victor's tactics escalated. He sent long emails alternating between pleas for help and threats of self-harm, blaming me for the family's collapse. He wrote about Harlan as if he'd been a thief, as if my happiness was built on stolen ground. At night, I found myself staring at the old suitcase I'd brought from house to house, now filled with photos, legal documents, and mementos, proof of a life built despite everything. I struggled to sleep, haunted by the drum of rain against my windows, the sense that I was still the boy waiting to be chosen. Every knock at the door felt like a test. Was I really worthy of the family I'd found, or was I always just a mistake, a line to be erased? Sometimes I'd sit by the window, watching the city lights blur through raindrops, holding the key pendant. Harlan had left me the letter from my mother I'd never opened. My laptop glowed with new messages from Victor. My security cameras flickered with images of him pacing outside the fence. I knew I had to confront him to put the past to rest once and for all. On a night when the rain fell heavier than ever, I sat alone, suitcase by my feet, the city humming with unresolved stories. I was tired of running from what had made me. I was ready to face the storm, not as the child who was given away, but as the man who had built a home from the pieces left behind. The day of reckoning arrived, shrouded in gray, the city outside blurred with the steady drum of rain against glass. I sat across from Victor in the crisp white light of Elliot Pierce's law office, the room chilled by tension more than air conditioning. Victor looked older, smaller than I remembered, his hands fidgeting with a wrinkled handkerchief as he tried to keep his voice measured. Jordan was there too, his presence grounding, a silent witness to the truths we'd all carried for too long. Victor wasted no time. He spoke of reconciliation, of healing the family, but his meaning was clear. He wanted money. He argued that some portion of Harlan's estate rightfully belonged to him, that after all these years we could come together if only you'd be reasonable, Atlas. I told him steady as I could that he'd forfeited every right to my life the day he walked away. His voice rose, face reddening, as he accused Harlan of stealing me, my mother, of betraying him, the world of being unfair. I took out the letter Mom had written, the one Jordan had helped me find, and laid it on the table. The truth was undeniable. She'd wanted to find me, to bring me home, but Victor had stood in the way. He tried new tactics, shifting to threats. He'd go public, he said, with every shameful detail he could dig up, from my childhood diagnosis to Harlan's past. He'd sue, he'd smear my name and ruin everything I'd built. I let him rant, let him spill his bitterness across the room. Jordan stepped in, quiet but firm, telling Elliot how Victor had engineered my removal, how he'd manipulated Mom, how the paperwork had been drawn up not out of desperation, but convenience. Every accusation Victor lobbed only returned to him heavier, weighed down by years of secrecy and cowardice. My hands were steady as I spoke, not with anger, but with the finality of someone who's carried too much weight for too long. I told them what it was to be a child, crossed off a list to build a life from broken parts, to find family where you least expect it. You decided I wasn't worth it, I said, my eyes fixed on Victor. I decided I was. The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Victor's defenses cracked. For a moment he was silent, his shoulders shaking as tears slipped down his face. I offered him only the dignity of truth. I told him if he wanted help, it would mean rehab, accountability, and no more manipulation. I would not bankroll his destruction, nor would I allow him to leech from what Harlan and I had created together. Elliot broke the silence with news that the court would dismiss any claims Victor made, and the authorities were opening a financial investigation into his recent behavior. The relief was almost painful, as if I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. When the meeting ended, I gathered my papers, Mom's letter, Harlan's will, the old key pendant I always wore, and looked out into the Seattle rain. The city was unchanged, but I wasn't. I was no longer a subtraction in someone else's ledger. I'd become the author of my own worth, the builder of my own belonging. In that moment, I stepped fully beyond the shadow of my past, ready to define family on my own terms. The rain had always been there for me, in sorrow, in healing, in every threshold I'd ever crossed. On the morning of the Harlan Vale Foundation's opening, it fell soft and steady, painting the city in silver as I stood beneath the tent with old friends and new faces. The Space Needle loomed nearby, a reminder of dreams first kindled in a boy's bedroom, rebuilt through heartbreak and hope. The hall was full of photos, Harlan and me in the garden, Mia and her parents, Jordan and I at the kitchen table, Dr. Reyes laughing in the sun. Each picture was proof that family could be chosen piece by careful piece. During the ceremony, a boy with a wheelchair rolled up to me, eyes wide, holding a blueprint he'd drawn himself. "Can I really be an architect?" he asked, voice tremulous with longing and doubt. I pressed the small brass key pendant into his palm and told him the truth. "You can build anything you want, just don't let anyone take you out of your own equation." I dedicated most of Harlan's inheritance to the foundation scholarships, housing projects, mentorship programs for orphans and kids with disabilities. The first complex we opened was a marvel of accessible design, a place with ramps, wide doors, reading rooms, and gardens, every detail shaped by the needs of those who'd always been left out. It was a kind of atonement, a way to turn my pain into possibility for others. Jordan and I found a new kind of peace. We met often, sometimes just for tea, sometimes sharing memories, both of us agreeing that Victor would never be part of this life again. We didn't forgive him, but we learned to forgive ourselves for what we could not have changed as children. Mia became a constant, her laughter filling my home as we grew older, mentoring kids together, offering the kind of welcome I'd once dreamed of receiving. Dr. Reyes was there too, quietly proud. My work flourished. I spoke at schools and conferences, advocating for design that included everyone, for dignity built into every space. Each project was a bridge back to the frightened child I'd been, a message that no one should have to climb alone. I saw myself in every blueprint, in every ramp and door and window, proof that we can all make a home for ourselves no matter how the world tries to write us out. On the final night after the foundation's launch, I sat on the porch of Harlan's old house, rain washing over the garden. The air was full of memories, a boy with shaking hands and dreams bigger than his body, an old man with a gentle heart, a family born out of brokenness and choice. I held the key pendant in one hand and my graduation photo in the other. "We built something beautiful out of ruin," I whispered, "and I finally chose myself." If you've ever found yourself left out, erased, made to feel like a mistake, ask yourself, what would it look like to build your own family brick by stubborn brick? The answer isn't simple, but it's yours to write. And if the rain comes, let it be a blessing, a promise that from everything broken, something strong can still grow.